Hey, I'm Melvin Van Peebles. Look, for those of you who don't know much about it, Akashic is the best independent book publisher in the whole land. We got to give him a little celebration interest. He's part of one of my tunes, the Apple Stretcher. Since Akashic is here in New York, so why don't we try it out? The tin cans go clattering down the lane, a drowsy bum thinks it's thunder and pulls the news over the head to stop the rain. No, it ain't Judgment Day, no, it ain't Armageddon. It's just the apples stretching in yawning, just morning, just New York, and a castle putting its feet on the floor. Support a castle.
Breadfruit Media is a US-based podcast production company that prioritizes the development and production of podcasts by people of Caribbean heritage. Founded by Jamaican-born Carrie Ann Reed Brown of the Carry On Friends podcast, she created Breadfruit Media to support representation of the Caribbean. Check out Breadfruit Media produced shows including BCLF Always Lit, Bridge to You, Carry On Friends, Millennial Health Podcast, Strictly Facts, a guide to Caribbean history and culture, and Style and Vibes. Listen to any of these shows on your favorite podcast platforms. To learn more about Breadfruit Media, visit their website at www.breadfruitmedia.com.
Hello, it's Shakira. My short story collection In Time of Need is now available as an audiobook, so please get it, and if you enjoy, leave a review or a rating.
You good for nothing, father wants to come for you in an hour. It's my first time on an airplane. I can't believe I'm on an airplane. Leon hit me again. I don't think lunch and meat lips would be appropriate anymore, you being an officer of the law and all. I first met Beti when her son stole my car.
Shakira Bourne's In Time of Need, the audiobook, is now available on Nook, Apple, Scribd, Google, and wherever audiobooks are.
Mr. Mears was dead, and there lay Mr. Mears in his childhood bed, snoring with the saliva running down his chin. When two people get married, what does happen? How it is you don't know what is married, you foolish boy? You just go in the church with all your family and friends, but that not important. The part that matter is later on when you cut the cake. That umpire finish. That's why I don't play cricket no more. Cause I just walk with a Collins and I would give one of them umpires a big lash with it.
Storyshift presents the audiobook for In Time of Need by Shakira Bourne. Get your copy wherever audiobooks are sold.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final event of the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival. Tonight, we are taking part in the panel titled Beti. And in this panel tonight, we have a discussion with three amazing authors of Indo-Caribbean heritage, and we'll be combing through the threads of Indo-Caribbean womanhood. Beti is the Bhojpuri dialectal word for daughter, and it's the first moniker that was bestowed on Indo-Caribbean women upon arriving to the Caribbean. Our three authors tackled the inherited narratives of these women and set out to design and describe new traits for contemporary expressions of Indo-Caribbean and Caribbean diaspora womanhood. We're going to be discussing what it means to reinvent Beti, incorporating tradition while embracing and empowering energies of a multicultural pan-Caribbean. So I'd like to take the time to introduce each of our wonderful panelists, starting with Professor Patricia Muhammad. She is the Emeritus Professor of Gender and Cultural Studies at the University of West Indies. She is a pioneer in feminism and the development of gender studies in the Caribbean and headed the Institute for Gender and Development Studies variously on the Mona campus and the St. Augustine between 1994 and 2015. Her scholarly contributions include self-authored books, Imagining the Caribbean, Culture and Visual Translation, and Gender Negotiations Among Indians in Trinidad, and amongst so many others as well. She recently published an award-winning book, Writing Gender in the Caribbean, Selected Essays. She has been involved in filmmaking, having produced 2 award-winning documentaries, Coolie Pink and Green, which is one that we will be hearing from tonight, as well as City on a Hill. In 2018, she was recognized as one of the 70 plus outstanding women graduates from the UWI in its 70th anniversary and in 2019, she was awarded a national gold medal from the government of Trinidad and Tobago for her contribution to the country on women and development issues. So an absolutely wonderful person to be having on tonight. We also have Crystal Satal. She is the author of the critically acclaimed memoir, Secrets We Kept, 3 Women of Trinidad. She is a PEN Award finalist and Hertog Fellow. She holds an MFA from Hunter College, and her work has appeared in Elle, the New York Times, Salon, Today's Parent, Catapult, and so many more. Her essays have been anthologized and in a few books, such as A Map is Only One Story, 20 Writers on Immigration, Family and the Meaning of Home, and Fury, Women's Lived Experiences in the Trump Era. She now teaches in the MFA program at Sierra Nevada University in Lake Tahoe. And finally, we have Gabrielle Delnath, who is an Guyanese-American Muslim writer and editor. First published at age 16, she penned personal essays on her experiences navigating the world as a Muslim American teenager. She served as an assistant editor on the Indo-Caribbean and Politics team at Brown Girl magazine for 5 years, and was also one of the editors of the magazine's first ever print anthology, Untold, Defining Moments of the Uprooted. Gabrielle hopes to continue to give a voice to those without a platform and provide authentic representation of minorities and marginalized communities through storytelling. She lives in New York at the bustling intersection of her passion for writing word and her deep love for her faith and culture. So welcome to all 3 of you wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much, Tiara.
Thank you, Tiara, for introductions.
Thank you, thank you. So diving into this conversation and this concept of womanhood and the image of Beti, or this, Indo-Caribbean female, I wanted to extend this first question to each of you and ask, what image of Indo-Caribbean women were you given growing up or presented growing up through family or community? And in what way did this impact the way you viewed yourself?
Whom would you like to start?
Anyone can start. No specific order. Feel free to take it as it comes.
Patricia, I want you to start. That's what I want.
The strange thing is that I grew up in a very Indian village in the south of Trinidad. There were almost no Africans. And up until the time I went to university in the 1970s, I had no sense of myself other than as a Trinidadian. I wouldn't have thought of my Indianness, if you like. in a way in which we think about race. That sounds fairy tale, but it's actually true. You know, I interacted with people in the village, Muslims and Hindus and everyone, but you know, there was no sense of whether you were the Indianness part didn't appear to be something that is really dominant. But what I probably did see was that, you know, there was a tendency for Indian women to be homemakers. They did multiple chores, but in a sense, they were seen as the homemakers and nurturers. And in the village, I do know that there were one or two violent families where husbands beat wives and so on. I think there was an early sensibility about gender and violence that I would have gained as a young child. I also would have looked at the relations between my mother and father in the house. My father was a school teacher and my mother was a homemaker. So again, I would have seen, you know, what defined her role. But the amazing thing is my mother was the one who taught us to read all. From the time we were 3, we were all reading, bought us all the books and so on. So there was never any sense that there was a path that was laid out for us. I never had that as a dimension of growing up. And this is in the 1950s. I was born in 1954. So, you know, it was, I think it might have been an unusual childhood because, you know, both of my parents were fairly well read and you know, so on. So let me start like that and hand over to someone else.
I think that what's really interesting is that, first of all, the question is really interesting because it's something that you don't think about until it's gone, until it's done. Like that time period in your life is done. And then asking me this question made me look back on this, thinking, growing up, the women, you look at your question said, in what way did this impact the way you view yourself? So I don't think of it as I'm growing up. I'm just experiencing it. And so this comes to me in the form of roles. What roles did women take on around me? Because that's what I was seeing, right? We had very limited TV growing up. So we didn't really watch a lot of TV. You know, we had 3 channels. That's it. You don't really get much else. So, and the TV that we did watch, it was movies that didn't represent anybody in Trinidad. So I didn't see myself on TV. I saw my mom at home working. I saw my aunts, all of them at home taking care of children. And even if they didn't have children, they took care of the home. So what I saw over and over again was women taking care of men. And this, even though my parents pushed, or really, really pushed for me to study something that they didn't do. But also it was the same narrative, right? It was go to school and study law or science. Those were the 2 things. Yet when I look around me, I don't see women doing anything with either one of those. So then I'm uprooted and I leave the Caribbean and I come to America, where you see women doing everything. And then the roles really shifted because my dad stayed in Trinidad and my mom now became the person who, you know, she was our support for everything, including financial support. And she took it on, and I thought she took it on in stride, and the strength that came with it, I thought that she just had it. It wasn't until we had conversations about that I found out this was hard for her. She was being uprooted too, because as a child, I'm not thinking that. But I think seeing women around you work is really important. And so I think I had to see that. And I didn't see that until I was a teenager. We didn't come here until I was 12. And once I saw her doing these things that made her so uncomfortable and taking on these jobs that I knew I would never want to do and she would never want me to do, but she was doing all of it so that I could do better, I think that really shifted my perspective on life.
I agree with, I had very similar experiences in some ways to what Crystal was speaking about. But I think for me, I'm a little bit more removed from the immigrant experience in a way. My grandparents came here about a little more than 40 years ago. My mom came here when she was 5, and so she grew up over here. And so I feel like I related to what you were saying about, you know, women taking care of men and how that was something that I saw as a child. And I think definitely affects me even now as a young adult, and the way, like, that's one of the things that I'm trying to make sure that I'm like pushing the boundary on and not just following suit in that way. But I also think that I was fortunate to also have, you know, my mom was is a working mom. My grandmother also worked. And so I also had these images of very strong women who, you know, I see them as like they are the matriarchy. I think in my household, it's my mom. And, you know, when it comes to my grandparents and that extended family, it's my grandmother. She's the glue, right? So, I've had very strong images of Indo-Caribbean women, but I also think for me, I didn't really understand what Indo-Caribbean meant when I was younger. I think I went to an Islamic school up until 2nd grade, and it was all, you know, predominantly Indo-Caribbean people. And so there was nobody that was different from me. So I didn't know that there was a difference. And I don't think I really realized that until I went to middle school and high school and interacted more with South Asians from the subcontinent, that I realized, oh, there's a difference, and feeling somewhat out of place. But also in terms, and this isn't the images that I most closely related to, aside from the people around me, like teachers and my mother and my grandmother, I had to go halfway around the world to find content where faces looked like mine. So they were Bollywood movies. And even though I could tell there was a difference, like I don't know exactly what they're saying, there's also a level of comfort in that. I've listened to these songs since I was a little baby, so I can mouth the words even though I don't know exactly what it means. And they eat similar foods to what we eat, even though it might not be exactly the same. But more importantly, they look like us. Like these are, you know, women and men who look like the people around me. Maybe not as great looking as Bollywood actors and actresses are always portrayed to be. But they had brown skin, and that was something that I didn't realize until much later. I had to literally go to cinema that is created halfway around the world to find faces that look like mine.
Thank you. I think everyone raised some really good points there, and I absolutely can relate, especially, you know, with you, Crystal, and Gabrielle, just because, again, like for me growing up in Canada, and also growing up in an area where there was really no one else who was Indo-Caribbean other than myself. All my images of Indo-Caribbean women and people came from my family, because there was no one else who shared that same background as me until much later on in my life. So thank you guys for that. So next, I would like to invite Patricia to read from Coolie Pink and Green. We are going to show a little bit of the clip first. And this was a film that Patricia did that is very interesting. It follows a back and forth between a young girl and a male elder as they talk about different parts of the Indo-Caribbean culture, the Indian roots, the religion, and just many different aspects. So if we can have that, that would be amazing.
Blood red and milk, the essence of pink. Leaf green and gold, the enchantment of bling. Like a purple rain from an orange sky into nylon pools, forever dry. The colors of my soul, an unconscious stream. Rivers of beauty that flow through my dreams.
Daughter, this is your inheritance, a rich legacy created thousands of years ago. Our people traveled with it as they crossed polluted seas. Their prayers maintained faith. The songs kept alive the music of their voices. Dances brought the rhythm of a new life to their feet. Rich spices preserved their taste. Religious rituals bound them to the new land.
Thank you. And Patricia, if you would like to go ahead with your reading.
May I just, before reading it, also situate the film just a tiny bit? First of all,
Absolutely.
clearly took on the concept of coolie, and which was seen as derogatory. And what I did is I claimed it, but I claimed it from an aesthetic point of view as well, coolie pink and green, because it was about the way in which Indians were seen as, less than, uncultured and so on. But what it does, it synthesizes almost what we've been talking about as young girls, as all our stories of every generation. It synthesizes that story with another generation, with the past. So this is a call and response between a young girl and an elder who is kind of her grandfather. And it is written in prose, in the style of, say, the Ramayana and Bhagavad Gita, which is prose again. So it has that kind of resonance. So because I can't speak two voices, please forgive me. I start midway in the film, and I will say when I will recognize the voice as I say the piece. This is the male elder. There's so much in our culture that we don't want you to lose. I remember the way the bride and groom were rubbed with saffron and dahi before the wedding day to make their skins shiny and healthy. I remember the saris the women wore with flashing sequins and anklets on their feet, making music as they walked. I remember the way they would paint their hands and feet with mehndi before ceremony. Young girl. My hands, a canvas on which patterns can be traced. Hennaed oils mixed to coal black, smoky sunsets, and intricate gaze. Fingers curved to a serpent's mouth. On my wrists, a bracelet shape. Like dark sequins on ochre, they move me with grace. I am told that this beauty, so fleeting, so ripe, turns to warm burnt sienna, to be deflowered overnight. Male elder. We're losing more than the art in our culture. We're losing our women. Once we give you a chance for education and work, we open a door too wide. But you have to take the consequences when you mix up the race. I'm afraid that others will not understand your taste. They will not want you to pray with us. Your children will not look like us. The young girl. They say they find me a suitable boy, light-colored with good hair, the right caste, not hoi polloi. His father is rich, his mother's a good wife, all the ingredients they can mix to set me up for life. But will they bend to my wishes, to the one I have seen, whose eyelashes speak desire, whose skin has such sheen, hair like plaited sheaves of cornrow, taking liberties in a field where beds were once made of razor grass, well molded by cutlass and steel. Like Draupadi, I drape a red sari, the folds fastened yet loose. My wedding day draws nearer. Which pathway do I choose? Male elder. I know you're going to do what your mind tells you. These days, young people have so much more freedom and choices. We didn't have that. There was only one way, the old way. Now all you have all your own way, but think back to your culture. Find the answers in your faith. Young girl. A garland of clay deers like asterisks of light. Sacred flames to tempt us from the demons of the night. When the wicks have burnt to cinder and the oils to either fade, will I turn to the Ramayana or to Channel 6 instead? A still fertile culture feeds me. Fictions reinvented each day. Virtual reality distorts virtue, and the jab left to pay. Male elder. All I ask is that you remember what kept us going all these years. This body, so frail in its sinew and skin, outward sign of all that ages, while a passion still rages within. Young girl. Holy colors, pink and green, and a taste that I savor. 9 shades and 9 races give me the Indian flavor. I feel a burning, a beating, a fire down below. This sensation spring up inside me just so. Blood drumming in my ears, my heart rate start to climb. Roll up the tassa bisessa, I want a chunky in time. Waist and grace moving my hips like a fast-speed blender. If you can't keep up, just watch me fender. You see how chutney playing all over the country? Man, you hear an adage song even in Laventry. Why I must choose between Shearing and me? Hey boy, what to tell you? It's Trini, I trip. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. And I really loved the film. There was so many different layers to it, which I thought were fantastic. And especially what inspired my next question as well was the passage where the male elder.
Wait, Tiara, hold on one second. You know what I miss in real life? Patricia, you need a clap for that. Was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal. This film was written as a synthesis of a lifetime. I had done for my PhD research, because I was born in the 50s, I could still look back and imagine the world before it had developed. So by the 80s and 90s, when I was doing my PhD, I could literally tell the story, which is what I did in gender negotiations. I could tell the story of an entire generation settling in and changing. And so it really was about claiming that space, and but also, inviting the confusions and the contradictions, but also owning it and being proud of it. So that was essentially. Sorry, Crystal. Tiara,
No, of course. I think that was such a good idea. I was like, yes, let's certainly clap for everyone in between. That was absolutely fantastic, as I mentioned too. But so the question that I kind of wanted to, that really kind of came to me from this, and a big point that was made in it, was just the fact that the male elder really makes a strong statement when he says that, we're losing our women once the door to education and work opens. And this also explores the fact that this, young female character wants to marry someone of Afro-Caribbean background instead of the light-skinned, good hair Indian boy from the, rich family. And this question is of course directed to everyone as well who would like to add into anything with it, but in your own experience, was there ever a preference in your families of marrying within Indo-Caribbean culture and limiting mixing with the Afro-Caribbean community?
Shall I go first and others join in? I won't be long, as I have a tendency to rattle on, so I will try and be brief. The thing is, I don't think there was an idea of not mixing, but the assumption was that you would not marry someone out of your race. This was just an assumption. It was not, the idea of mixing was taken for granted. I mean, we all live, as you all do as well, in worlds that are with many races. So in that sense, I think that, but work is something that work is frightening, because work is about wages and salaries and the independence that women get. So that is where the fear is, that you will make your own choices because you have that independence to do so. Let's hear how the others think about it as well.
Yes. Anyone would like to jump in on that one, feel free.
Sure.
Can you repeat the question, please, Tiara? Sorry.
No worries. So the question was, in your own experience, was there ever a preference in your family of marrying within Indo-Caribbean culture, and just not necessarily mixing with the Afro-Caribbean community?
Oh yes, that was definitely there. Unfortunately, right? Because it's heartbreaking to have to say, yeah, actually my family is very racist, and racism in America is very different. And I think America is in its own little bubble, right? Where there's racism. The main thing is between blacks and whites, right? But then once you leave America, and I try to tell people, it goes on everywhere. Um, in Trinidad, it's between the Africans and the Indians, and so my grandmother is half Venezuelan, half Indian, and because of that, she was kind of shunned, and then no one wanted to talk about the fact that she was mixed. So the only way that I found out anything was when I was old enough, and I thought, okay, well, no one wants to talk about it. Let me sit down with this woman and just ask her her story. And she told me everything. And I mean, the thing with asking someone to tell their story is that they want to tell their story. They just need someone who will listen. And so I remember this one, it was actually a day where we sat down and she was pulling stuff out of her safe and she was showing me birth certificates and things that nobody had ever asked to see. And she was explaining, so everyone assumed that my grandmother was half black, half Indian. No one ever asked her. She was half Venezuelan, actually, which I thought was fascinating. And there were a lot of racial slurs that were thrown at her while she was growing up. And there was a lot of pressure on, I think, my aunts and uncles to marry Indian so that, I don't even know how to put this, but to marry Indian so you could dilute whatever else was there, which they assumed was African. So yeah, there was a lot of pressure there to do that, and I think I've tried to do a lot of work to undo that kind of thinking within my own family, but it is hard because tradition is real. Like cultural traditions are, people hold on to it whether it makes sense or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Gabrielle, what about you in your experience?
I do think that this is again a little bit of having to do with generational experiences. So I feel like for like in my household, you know, I live with my parents and my sister. There's never been conversations like that, and I've never heard those things. However, I am aware on the larger scale that these like people do say racist things, and that there is a racism problem within the Indo-Caribbean community and the South Asian community against Black people. And, you know, so I've heard it in my extended family as you know, women around me who are my age start to get married, you know, hearing people say certain things about that. And the implication is that it's not a positive thing, you know? But I think just, even though that there aren't expectations from my own family, I think that not so much having to do with whether they're Black or Indian, but more about whether they're Indo-Caribbean or they're South Asian, because I grew up with a large South Asian population around me. And I feel like there's been, you know, there's a familiarity with what you know. And so I feel like sometimes, and especially because we've been excluded, Indo-Caribbeans for a long time, we've been excluded from the larger South Asian diaspora, or haven't been recognized as part of the larger South Asian diaspora. You know, there are those differences and they are highlighted. So I think I feel it internally, I can feel it. I'm like, sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe my parents would prefer if I married somebody who was Indo-Caribbean, because that's exactly what we are and it would be comfortable. And, you know, there's no explanation that has to go around those experiences. But yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of what my experience has been.
Thank you for that. I do think that's definitely a common one, and I can relate to everyone on that sense as well. Just in terms of the older generations, I think my grandparents certainly had that stronger Indian connection, and kind of, you know, held on to it a lot, and also sort of expected it in continuing down. And right now, Gabrielle, I'd like to actually invite you to read from what I found on the search for the perfect nose ring. I think it's the perfect introduction to speaking more about what those Indian roots mean to us.
Sure, thank you. So this was an essay that I published when I was at Brown Girl magazine in 2016. Why are they returning your money? Kutub asked as we parked in front of Cuba, an Asian fusion restaurant in Connaught Place. Kutub was our driver for the day and had received a call from our hotel to inform us that the jeweler was returning our money. To commemorate our family vacation in Delhi, I wanted to purchase an authentic Indian nose ring. My father explained to Kutub that we had paid a jeweler to agree to custom make a nose ring for me. The jeweler promised his employees would work on it today, but they didn't show up to work this morning. We're leaving for the airport early tomorrow, and there's no way for them to deliver the nose ring on time, my dad continued. Well, I can't let my sister go home without her nose ring. I have a friend whose family has been in the jewelry business for generations. They are sure to have a wide selection for her to choose from. Shall I call him? We can go right after dinner, Kutub suggested. He knew English better than most of the drivers we had met during our stay in New Delhi. It was almost 11 p.m. and we hadn't even eaten dinner yet. Dad hesitated for a moment, but I pleaded silently. My big brown eyes proved to be persuasive. If he's available, then we could look around, he finally agreed. It was 12:15 a.m. when we finally left Cuba. As we settled into the car, Kutub announced that he had called his friend who would allow us into his private showroom. When we arrived, I noticed that the enormous showroom was attached to the jeweler's home. Despite his large collection, he did not have the type of nose ring I was looking for. The only one that caught my eye was a small sapphire gem encased in gold claws. A few months after I turned 16, I had my nose pierced. The decision was partially cosmetic, but was also a way to embrace my heritage. Nose rings have been part of the Indian culture for hundreds of years. In the late 1800s, my ancestors, as indentured servants, emigrated from India to the then British colony of Guyana in South America. Their culture and customs blended with those of the Europeans, Chinese, Africans, and natives who were also living and working in Guyana. Through the generations, we have lost the native language of my ascendants. The villages they departed from remain unknown. We have no connection to distant relatives that might still reside in India. In fact, none of my grandparents or great-grandparents have ever visited the subcontinent. As I grew older, I became more interested in the origins of my family. In the exploration of my own identity, I discovered various methods to reconnect to my ancestral roots. I began taking Kathak lessons, a type of classical Indian dance, and became an avid watcher of Hindi films. I purchased the Hindi version of the Rosetta Stone program, believing that a better understanding of the language would somehow teach me something about my familial history of which I knew so little. A nose ring was an outward approach to incorporate more of the Indian tradition into my daily life. As I took another look at the assortment of nose rings before me, the beauty of the sapphire gem stood out even more, and I knew it was the one I had to buy. However, in my hunt for the perfect nose ring, I realized that this piece of jewelry was far less important than I had originally believed. It was Kutub's generosity, intangible but very evident, that provided me with the priceless insight into my heritage that I had been seeking for years. Beginning at 8 a.m. that morning, he drove us around to the famous sites of Delhi, including Jama Masjid, the Lotus Temple, and the Qutub Minar. Ironically, our driver shared the same name as the first Muslim Sultan of Delhi, who erected the historic column. Before dinner, Qutub took us to a tea shop that he guaranteed would re-energize us and soothe our unsettled stomachs, which we had suffered from all day. While my parents, for the following 2 hours, tasted numerous tea flavors from Darjeeling to mango, Qutub picked up our custom-sewn langas from the bazaar we had visited earlier. He had not eaten dinner and was probably more exhausted than we were. Yet at midnight, he still offered to take us to a jeweler to search for the nose ring I, a girl to whom he had no connection and would probably never see again, desired. In my many travels abroad, This was my only time experiencing such a high level of hospitality. It took me by surprise that my greatest insight into the Indian culture did not come from a Hindi movie, a history book, or one of the museums we visited in Delhi, but instead came from the common man, one of the numerous taxi drivers working in the capital of the second largest country in the world. My sapphire nose ring is still one of my most prized possessions today because it serves as a reminder to practice the values of generosity and respect inherent in the Indian culture, the culture of which I am a product. Through my interactions with Kutub, I learned the true essence of what it is to be Indian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. So the question that really came to me from this one, because I found it so interesting that you were able to pinpoint such a specific moment where, you know, you learned what it was to be Indian and connect to those roots and carry those roots. So my question as well to Patricia and Crystal is, can you both think of a time when you felt that you learned what it meant to be Indian and to carry your roots as well?
I want to go back to something. Sorry, I started. I want to go back to something Crystal said at the very beginning, that you don't, when you're going through things, you don't really understand them. You experience them, and that understanding or that cognition comes after. So, in a sense, the fact that you understand what it is to be Trinidadian, you learn when you leave Trinidad. And I've lived in Europe and in Jamaica and in the US and so on, and then you understand the difference. And I think the identity of Indianness is perhaps something that comes when you have to defend, when you're called upon to defend something that you believe in. I think one of the strongest motives for me in creating, in writing in the way in which I've written for much of my life, starting with a paper that is called The Creolization of Indian Women, which became a must read for every university student. And that was written in the early 80s, is that I began to understand a concept of Indian womanhood that I did not agree with, which is that Indian women were supposed to be passive, subservient, nurturers. They were supposed to not be aggressive, and so on. And I felt as if this was something that I didn't understand, I didn't experience. That was not what I had experienced in my family. My grandmother, ran her household and essentially earned the full income and looked after her family. My mother, despite being a housewife, obviously did everything and was intelligent and commanded, a lot of control over the house and so on. And most of the women I knew were like that. So part of understanding Indianness and being an Indian woman, if I understand your question, I think came with a sense of having to rewrite the discourse on Indian womanhood. And if you look at much of my work, that is what I've been doing. I've been saying, do not look from the outside into our culture. Look at how we negotiate culture differently. The rules change, but we have found ways to negotiate it and to also get, we understand how power needs to be negotiated in different ways. We understand when there have to be collusions, when we have to accommodate, when we have to compromise, or when we have to stand up and say this is it. So that's maybe is a long awakening, I feel like. But one that comes through writing, because I've always written in order to understand. Writing is my mode of understanding. And I can see Gabrielle nodding, because I can see that's what she also did.
Patricia, I feel like I want to sit down in your classroom and have your words just like wash over me is what I feel like I really need. Okay, because what you're saying, your words that you read and the the words that you're saying right now, it's just, I feel like I needed to be here today to share this space with you because you're doing something for me. It's like filling up my soul right now. Um, I don't know what I don't your question is so hard for me, Tiara. I have no idea what it means to be Indian. I feel like I am in an identity crisis more than half the time because I inhabit so many different identities, right? And they pull and they tug and they want attention, and they come out whenever they feel like. I sound like I have a multiple personality disorder, right? But that's really what it feels like. And so what happened over the pandemic period is that I feel like a lot of people were in crisis and a lot of people were looking for something to keep going, right? My thing is that somehow along the way, I started meditating and it helped. And I decided I don't want to just take a yoga class from white women anymore, because where I live, it's predominantly white women teaching yoga. I want to learn where it came from, right? I know where it came from, but I want to learn more about it. And so I took a course and I took a full course and I became a yoga teacher. And what I learned changed my life because a lot of it is spiritual. In fact, some can argue that almost all of it is spiritual because of where it started. And so is that part of my Indianness journey? I don't know, right? But there was something there that called me back, because it referenced a lot of the works that I studied growing up. The Vedic Upasana. I went to a Vedic school. The Vedic Upasana, it's just so many prayers and bhajans and everything were just lifted out of there. And I was reading this and I thought I knew nothing going in. And then I realized I knew so much more. But it was that full circle thing where you're growing up and you don't appreciate anything that you're learning. And then as an adult, you go back to it again. So maybe that's part of the journey. Do I have a definitive answer? No, I don't. I wish I did, but I don't, because it's hard. And I feel like I'm always growing and evolving in all these different ways.
I love that. I really do. And I think it for sure can be such a tough thing to pinpoint a moment. And that was why I kind of thought about this one quite a bit myself, because I mean, I haven't even fully pinpointed a moment where I can say the same thing, which is kind of strange. There's moments where I feel like I do, but then there's moments where I feel like I'm nowhere close to even figuring that out. But I love the fact that you guys are just blending into each part so perfectly. Crystal, I'd like to invite you now to read from Secrets We Kept. I think that is the best to transition into our next question.
Thank you. I'm just going to tell you that I'm reading from towards the beginning of the book, and it's a point in the story where I kind of hold hands with my grandmother and my mother, but also the reader. And then we enter this world together as the understanding. And that's why I choose to read from this part. But also, what you said, Patricia, earlier, you said it's a call and response. And that's what I feel like this part of the book was for me. She achieves each step of the cooking process with finesse. She twirls around the kitchen with a final sweep of her elegant arms, one we both laugh over. She signals to me that dinner is done. Fluffy rice, chunky saffron dal, and curry chicken. The sting of Scotch bonnet saturates the air. My mother spoons a mountainous amount of food onto 2 plates. She sits across from me with a fork in hand and opens her mouth to call to my father and my sister, but I speak before she can. Ma, why Grandma want Grandpa dead? She drops her fork. It clatters to the ceramic countertop. Oh God, Chris, them memories and them eating me up inside ever since he gone in that hospital. Me only waking up so in the middle of the night to see 2 eye burning on me so like fire. She starts to tell me about a beating that has haunted her for 36 years. The ease with which she slides into the telling of this story shows me she was bursting to tell it as much as I wanted to ask. With my grandfather struck lifeless in the hospital, she's finally safe. Our steaming plates of food are pushed to the side. They grow cold. Runny dal pools in the middle of the rice. It clumps. The glistening curry chicken loses its shine. Veins in her neck pulsate as she speaks. Her eyes dance and dilate, nostrils flare, cheeks pucker, and the palms slap the table. The fluorescent bulbs burning down on us seem to dim, and she glows amber in the darkness slithering around us. We start at the beginning. We go back to the haunting, to the cycle, to the deafening roar of silence from women echoing off the coasts of the islands. I learn that my mother and my grandmother do want to tell us. All we must do is ask, then listen. They reach deep into the gullet of Trinidad's history to extract stories women carry, stories like my grandfather have striven to squelch. Their voices are thread-thin and low, slow and rhythmic musical notes from the side pockets of a steel pen. Their words crescendo like the pulsation of island music. I close my eyes and listen to their textured words layered with Trinidadian Creole. They will spend a lifetime trying to escape the islands and these memories, to unclasp the shackles around each wrist. The cadence of their language is mature and differs from the shrill intonations of the children they once were. Their words are incantatory, a chant I cannot, will not forget. I feel it like blood pumping in my veins. These two women pour themselves into me, and for 4 years, it is difficult to pull apart our separate lives. What I learn from our islands, our people, and their buried collective history torments me before it shifts into something else entirely. My family's history attacks me in waves as notorious as those that clobber the Caribbean shores. My grandmother, my mother, and I, we enter this world together, collaborators.
Crystal, I always get chills every time I've revisited your book. It's just, I like, it's one that I've raved about endlessly just because when I first read it, it shook me. Honestly, it did. And yeah, it just even getting to hear you read it out loud for this point is just absolutely amazing. Amazing. Thank you. So from this one, a big question that came for me, and again, this one was, because as all of you are female storytellers, have you ever felt that others have tried to silence your voice because of the topics you've chosen to cover in your work? And have you ever been hesitant to share the stories that you have in the event of these things?
Tiara, thank you so much for those kind words. You really have helped me, been such a big supporter of this book too, especially on social media, which helps a ton. There's a short answer to this, which is maybe to the first part and definitely no to the second part. So I don't know if people tried to stop me along the way. I just know that I'm like a force, right? Like once I put my mind to something, I know that I'm going to do it. And that's not to say that I don't question myself along the way. There are so many questions along the way, right? But you save that for your peers who will help support you along the way, and you can talk through some of the things that that you think might be obstacles. But when I started this project, I started as fiction. And I remember you and I talking about this, but I started as fiction, and actually I had a mentor who said, oh, why don't you write this as, she asked questions first, and she found out eventually that I was writing nonfiction cloaked as fiction. And she said, why are you doing that? You can write this as nonfiction. And then we talked about the differences in the genres and what that would mean to the work itself. And I didn't realize that memoir was a genre. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And then I started along this path, and it is exhausting. Memoir writing, just nonfiction writing in general, is exhausting research-wise. And so I went down this path, and the deeper I went into these stories, the more I understood. And it took a long time. It took 10 years for me to finish this book. And I thought, I definitely want to do it as nonfiction, because I couldn't find nonfiction books in the Caribbean that dealt with a lot of these issues like domestic violence and racial tension. There were a lot of fiction books, but I really wanted to show real life stories. And I talked to so many women, just to understand the culture a little bit better, the mentality of some of the women, and understand what their lives were like on a day-to-day basis. So not just my grandmother and my mother, but just every woman who would talk to me, and they were really willing to talk. And I had to thank all of them, just women overall, for sharing their stories to help with this book. And so then the last part of your question, which is, have I ever been hesitant? No, I've never been hesitant. Well, I've been the opposite, actually. I think I overshare sometimes, and I will go and I will share stories that are maybe not appropriate for that audience. And so it's a gamble, right? Especially when you read something new or you're dealing with a new audience. I never stop, and because I'm always testing the waters. And so hesitant person, but there are a lot of heavy stories that maybe some people need to pause and think about before they share them, especially if they're nonfiction stories, because you're putting such a big part of yourself out into the world.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Patricia or Gabrielle, I'm wondering if you guys have ever faced something similar to that as well.
Gabrielle wants to start first, and then I'll. Gabrielle, your turn.
I was just gonna say the same to you. Okay, I'll start. I don't think that I've ever felt like others have tried to silence my voice, but I do think that it's something that a lot of female storytellers, particularly in the South Asian diaspora, whether that means Indo-Caribbean or any other part of the South Asian diaspora, faces. And the way that I know that is, I've talked about being a writer, but I'm also the editor of Untold, which is an anthology of 31 creative nonfiction stories about women's experiences as South Asians living in the diaspora on various issues. And much like what Crystal was talking about, a lot of them are heavy topics. Or they're topics that are very taboo in the larger community, whether it's divorce or mental health, infertility. And there are some Indo-Caribbean stories within the anthology, but one of the things that I really came across is when we talk about these things, or even when we talk about our family, we've been taught that to speak truthfully about our experiences, especially when it comes to elders in our family, that to be authentic storytellers is to tell the truth, even if it doesn't shine the best light on those people, is disrespectful. And so a lot, the storytellers that I've worked with, it's a challenge to rise beyond that and to challenge that and to be like, no, I can tell my authentic story, and this is not disrespectful of someone else, but respectful of my experience and allowing me to tell my true story. So I think it's something that a lot of women, a lot of female storytellers are struggling with, because whether we're, they're from the subcontinent or even within the Indo-Caribbean community, there's still that idea of what will people say. They're, learning to find their voices and I think we're starting to break beyond, that boundary.
So if I may just briefly, I think I'm like Nightfall. I can't write about sex. And so, and maybe it's my generation, but also, I'm private in that way, and the the act of writing about sex. So I don't think anybody is silenced me. I've silenced myself. But I have written about sexuality, and gender and sexuality, but in not personal ways, and I've written extensively about it, in fact. But I think one of the things that really strikes me is that as a writer, you write, stories come to you, things come to you. If you have to write it to be authentic, as Gabrielle says, or honest or true, to have the words come out from you with that depth so that it resonates. It has to be something that you feel deeply about, that you want to see. And I think I've always done that. And I've written not just about Indians, I've written about Africans, I've written about whites, I've written about everything, So I have not placed boundaries. And one of the recent things I wrote, apart from others, is a story that I wrote about my mother, who had Alzheimer's and was dying. And we looked after her for about 10 years. And at the end of it, I wrote for an edited book that I worked on, a project I worked on work-life balance and aging. I wrote a piece called When Death is Not an Adversary. And I literally wrote out, coming to terms with her illness and her dying. And wrote it not just for myself, but for my family. And it was one of the most liberating things, because there's so much emotion in you that unless you analyze it and express it and tell that story to other people, because I felt that others needed to understand as well how you come to terms with that. And so, I really, I'm sure there are things, I suspect one of the things that's really difficult to write about is also to be very honest about race. No matter what we say, it is very, very difficult to write about race. And it is very unfortunate, because the way I've lived my life, I have actually not refused to admit. I know that sounds strange. I refuse to admit that race is an issue. I have forged ahead, and I understand structural nature, and I understand I've suffered from it as well in some ways. But I do not experience and want to engage in the world in the short time I have on earth, as if that is the thing that should define me. It might define what others see of me, but not what I want to experience or what I want to see. I don't know how I got at center. It is fine in the center, but I found that I did that. Perhaps it is owed to my husband as well, who is a painter. He's British. And living and working with him and having him have that confidence in me, having him celebrate me in every way has also freed me up. So I've been, and he's not the only partner, but that has allowed me to have a voice that is maybe beyond the Indian voice, as it were. So, I think apart, as I say, Naipaul and sex, and having said that, I really like how Shani Muthu can handle, the topics she does. So I celebrate people who can.
I am a fan of her work as well, for sure. And I think just on the note of these topics that can be difficult to write about as well, Gabrielle, I'd like to invite you now to read from Unveiling Me, which really covered your journey with I think a bit of a tricky topic.
Sure, thanks. So this is the anthology I was speaking about. My co-editor Kami Ramdeen and I were both Indo-Caribbean women, and so it was very. We're both Guyanese, and so it was very empowering to be the editors on this project that not only told Indo-Caribbean stories, but also other stories from within the South Asian diaspora. So the story is called Unveiling Me. I've been thinking about doing something drastic, and I don't know who else to talk to about it. Sitting on my bed, I signed the email and pressed send. Even though it was 9 p.m. on a school night, my high school guidance counselor responded almost immediately. Gabby, please stop by my office first thing in the morning. The next day, I walked into the big brick school building, and as the bell for first period rang, I made my way up the steps to the administration floor. Halfway down the long hall, I opened the door to my left and greeted the receptionist. "Hi, dear, how can I help you?" she said, smiling. "Miss Gottfried asked me to see her. I didn't have time to sign up for an appointment," I replied. "She's been expecting you. You can go right in." The student body of my high school in Long Island, New York, was 49% white, 49% Asian, and 2% other. This particular decision wasn't something my friends, who were all non-Muslim, could understand. I had only a handful of Muslim peers, and even then it was clear that we had different priorities. Often, other 15-year-olds at my school were worried about who was taking more AP courses, who was invited to the upcoming party, and who was dating who. I had been thinking about it for weeks before I even reached out to Miss Gottfried, but I knew I needed to talk through my feelings with someone older, someone with perspective. I didn't know if she, a Caucasian woman in her 30s, would comprehend the complexities of such a decision at my age, but there was no one else I felt like I could confide in. It started out as a secret that I kept to myself. I withdrew from the outside world and into my own mind, choosing to spend my lunches and breaks alone, weighing whether this was the right choice for me. I thought about how my family would feel, about what my friends would say, about how different parts of my life would change. I walked past small offices with names of different guidance counselors on each door until I found Miss Gottfried's. Even though it was open, I knocked. "Good morning." "Gabby, hi, come in, sit down, she said as she ushered me in. I settled into a chair on the other side of her desk, which was cluttered with folders labeled with the names of students from my grade. "I'm glad you came to see me. Why don't you tell me what's been going on? What is the something drastic that you've been thinking about?" "Oh, I'm so sorry if that scared you. It's not what it sounds like," I said, pausing. "I don't think I ever told you this before, but I'm Muslim." "No, I don't think you have." "Yeah, so, well, recently I've been thinking about wearing a headscarf as a daily way to practice my religion," I continued, looking down at my thumbs as I twiddled them. It was the first time I said it out loud. "Oh, okay, well, that is definitely not what I thought you were going to say. Tell me more about it. How long have you been thinking about this?" she asked. "It's been a few weeks. There's this reality show, All American Muslim, that came out in October. It follows a few Muslim families in Dearborn, Michigan," I started to say. Miss Gottfried turned her computer towards me and typed the name into Google. She clicked on the first link and started to scroll. "I didn't know about this. It seems really interesting," she said. "Yeah, well, of course, it's becoming controversial because it shows Muslims in a positive light." I remembered I didn't even want to watch All American Muslim at first. It was my mom who suggested we watch it together. I thought it was going to be some boring documentary about the history of Muslims in the US. Anyways, so some of the women on the show wear a headscarf and some don't, I explained. The more episodes I watched, the more I realized the women in the show who wear hijab don't lack anything in their lives because of it. They aren't restricted because of it. They actually have this additional layer to their lives, this closeness to our faith that I want to explore too. "I can definitely understand that. It's such a brave decision to be thinking about," she said. For her, she probably thought it was brave because no one at my high school had ever worn a hijab before. But I didn't feel brave. I was just following an internal compulsion, a pulling inside of me. "Thanks," I murmured with a shy smile. "In your email, you said you don't have anyone else to talk to about this. Why do you feel that way?" Ms. Gottfried asked. In Islam, the choice to wear a hijab is a deeply personal journey. Contrary to popular misconceptions, it's not an act that's meant to be forced upon a woman. While I knew my family would never push me one way or the other, I thought there would be some expectation that I would wear the hijab once I brought it up. It wasn't something I could just talk about and then take back. And I didn't want it to be an experiment abandoned as my fascination with the idea faded. Because of the respect I had developed for the hijab, I knew it would be a long life commitment for me. A lifelong commitment for me. So I felt the decision had to solely come from me and remain uninfluenced by anyone around me, society at large, friends, and even family. Religion had played a part in my upbringing, but I wouldn't have described my family as particularly devout. My grandparents had immigrated to the United States from Guyana in the 70s, and one of the unique things about the Indo-Caribbean community is the difference in religion within families. Some of my mother's extended family are Hindus and Jehovah's Witnesses, and my father's entire family practices either Christianity or Hinduism. While I attended an Islamic school until second grade, My parents took me to classes every week where I learned to read the Quran and went to the masjid regularly during Ramadan. We also didn't pray 5 times a day, and no one in my family wore a hijab. There was sometimes a picking and choosing of the practices that were observed. And even when we adhered to religious customs, we often did so without learning the purpose behind them, which is the reason I didn't understand why I had to wear a hijab when I entered a masjid, or why some women wore it in public. Then it was just a mark of real religiosity to me. Eventually, my aunt became the first in our family to wear the hijab, but she made the choice in her early 30s when she was already married and had her first child. So even in my family, I didn't have peers who could grasp why I would wear one at my age or the nuances of the decision. I explained this to Miss Gottfried. I see. I want you to know you're not alone in this. Even if no one else you know has gone through this in the same way before. Mrs. Greenberg is our school social worker, and I think it might be helpful for you to meet with her. This is definitely a big decision, and she can help you process all of your thoughts. How does that sound? She replied. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much. You're welcome, she said as she filled out a pass for me to return back to class. Regardless of what you decide, this is all very commendable. And Gabby? Yes. When you're ready, I think you should let your mom in. She'll understand. I nodded and then started the long journey to my English classroom at the other end of the building.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. And from this, I think that whole theme and just that whole exploration of, diving into religion and then again within Indo-Caribbean culture as well, that is just, it's absolutely fascinating. And I wanted to ask what role religion played in your expectations as an Indo-Caribbean woman for yourself and through your religion as well.
I think for me, it's very interesting, right? Because I think that there's a little bit of a dichotomy of being an Indo-Caribbean Muslim or even, a devout member of any religion, in the sense that I think that Indo-Caribbeans, a lot of our community has a strong foundation in religion, but there's also this concept of the party culture, right? There's drinking going on, there's parties going on. And there's that dichotomy between what I would sometimes see Indo-Caribbean women in my generation in America wearing, what they looked like, how they carried themselves, and what I was learning that the hijab would mean if I chose to wear it, and that this was something that women were encouraged to wear, but that it was also a personal choice. So I think for me to wear the hijab very much went against the expectations of being an Indo-Caribbean woman. I think that there are not a lot of, I'll just talk about Guyanese women because I'm most familiar, but I don't think there are a lot of Guyanese women that wear hijab that I've come across. So I do think that it is somewhat of a novelty. And my aunt being the first one in our family, it was an idea that our family had to get used to. So, and I think a lot of the few Indo-Caribbean women who have either worn hijab in the past or have some experience with wearing the hijab or wanting to embrace that part of our faith, they often brush up against that dichotomy of, there are certain things in our culture that doesn't really align with our faith. And then but we want to have both. And how do you have both and be respectful of both? Because that can be hard. So yeah, I'll just keep my answer short to that so others can answer.
Absolutely. I can imagine for that one as well. And I can also, at least speak to, being Trinidadian and Guyanese, and I haven't often come across, anyone who was Indo-Caribbean and Muslim at the same time, and as well had made the choice to wear the hijab or anything of that sort either. So I commend your decision as well to, get closer to your faith. I think that's so beautiful.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like to invite Crystal now to read from Secrets We Kept one more time. We have this last passage is absolutely beautiful. And
sorry, I didn't realize I was up. I'm finding it right now. Here we go. So this is from the chapter called Letters. It's the beginning of the chapter. And at this point in the story, as a reader, you know that my father has cheated on my mom, and so has my grandfather. So my grandfather has cheated on my grandmother. The difference is that my grandfather produced a child, and his name is Avinash, and I reference him in this section. Rebecca is the name I give my grandmother in this book. So letters. My mother left Trinidad in 1999. Not a woman to be taken advantage of, my mother knew the only way to claim herself was to sever ties with the Caribbean and its men. My mother didn't uproot us solely for selfish reasons. Trinidad was unstable. Dole Jade, the notorious drug lord, was finally convicted of murder, but that put our country in a tumultuous state. Police corruption was flayed open, and everyone was unsure of who to trust. My father felt the pressure at work, seeing the outcome of dealings with the Jade gang daily. I should also mention that my father was a police officer. This is known information at this point. Brutal deaths and the kidnapping and raping of young boys and girls. These families, scared for their lives, couldn't talk to the authorities. If my father was approached for a bribe and refused, my mother wanted us removed from the consequences. When the untouchable Dole Jade was arrested for ordering the wipeout of the entire Babalao family, the death penalty returned to Trinidad and Tobago. He, with 8 members of his gang, were hanged in June 1999 over the course of 3 days. It aired on the news every minute and hit the front page of every newspaper. Try as they might, my parents couldn't hide the violence from me. Because people owed money to Jade, and that money was owed to the Colombians, kidnap for ransom became the slogan now, and children were being taken daily. Our plans had been in place for some time, but while doors were being broken in and houses set ablaze, my mother wrapped us up and brought us to the United States. Because of my father's job commitment and also because of his pension, he couldn't leave with us. That did nothing to deter my mother, who held our hands firmly at the airport and walked toward the plane, never glancing back at our crying father. It took me years to acclimate to New Jersey weather. The winters were too harsh and the beaches opaque, riddled with mussel shells that cut our feet. My sister, at the tender age of 8, absorbed everything around her and slipped seamlessly into American culture, losing her accent. At 12, I never got used to the weather and fantasized about moving back, holding steadfast to my native tongue. With my father still in Trinidad, I hoped one day we would return. In America, my mother reinvented herself, using the aliases Annie or Annalisa for her babysitting jobs. She embraced her fierceness, stepped out of her husband's shadow, began working full-time again after 12 years, and planted a life for herself and her 2 girls in stubborn soil. I wondered also if this was punishment for him, one of the only ways she could castigate him for cheating on her. We left our home, our family, and our sense of security, of knowing our place in the world. In the wake of my father's deception, I thought of my uncle Avinash. I wondered if my mother ever reevaluated her feelings about my grandfather's unfaithfulness, now knowing firsthand the emotions that came with being deceived. Did she forgive Rebecca for her harshness toward Avinash now that she knew the bite of betrayal? It's different, Chris, says my mother. When you make me think about it like that, I know it was more complicated for Mommy, but she was my mother, and so at a whole she had a different standard. We called my father often by way of phone cards, and I begged him to come and get me. I wish I could, my child, he said. Eventually, the visas we acquired to legally enter the US expired, and we became undocumented. If we went back now, we'd never be able to enter the States again. My aunts and uncles, who also lived here illegally, but years ago, when my grandmother became a resident, they filed their paperwork with the United States Citizen and Immigration Services. With this in motion, their status was pending, and they were protected under an amnesty granted by Bill Clinton for undocumented immigrants residing in America who were waiting for a status shift. We had nothing, no papers to speak of, no safety net. My grandmother was willing to sponsor us, but my mother held off on filing our legal immigration paperwork. I could see uncertainty settle around us on whether or not America was a permanent move. In that crucial period, we lost precious time and wouldn't gain legal status in the US for a decade.
I'm muted. Thank you so much, Crystal. I think what I really loved about that passage is just especially the part where you mention how your mother really reinvented herself once you guys immigrated to America. And so my thoughts on that were just, with like it can be said that I have seen before that Indo-Caribbean womanhood and feminism began during the indenture period because women made decisions to travel alone. They were working, and of course we know this was a completely flawed system as well, but it was a chance where they did reinvent themselves. And your mother again did this when she came to America. So can you speak to how Indo-Caribbean women have reinvented their roles, you think, in recent times now that we're living in?
So that's hard because I feel a little outside of the Indo-Caribbean community a lot of the time. I don't have a huge Caribbean community where I live. I have to travel to really feel that. But that said, I have friends and we talk about a lot of these issues, and what it comes down to is our parenting, I think. I think it really comes down to what are we going to pass on to the next generation? Because for me, it was what were the sacrifices she made so the next generation could do better? And then it was what did my mom also sacrifice? For her, it was what can I sacrifice so you don't have to make any sacrifices and you could just live your life? And so I think that these two women did so much of that I really was able to live a lot of the life that I wanted to live. It was there were a lot of the time I lived in shadow because I was undocumented, and that was really hard, and that's a whole other layer to deal with. But there's also when it comes to parenting my children is what do I want to pass on? And I think I turn to more universal things like kindness and thoughtfulness. And because I'm not in a period of crisis like my grandmother and my mother were in the middle of all these crises, that because I'm not there, I can now focus my attention elsewhere. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is for the next generation of Indo-Caribbean women is that we need to process a lot of the trauma that has happened. And this is a step in that direction. It is a step in processing some of that trauma and understanding a lot of the history that was never written into our history textbooks. And now we can move off in different directions. Like, I don't want to write another nonfiction book that has to do with this. I need a break. That stuff is heavy, but it's there now and it's part of history, and my children can read it, their children can read it, your children can read it. It is for a long time I struggled with whether or not this book was going to make a difference in the world, and it is making a difference, and I'm very happy for that. Even if it's just one person, it's doing the work that I needed it to do.
Absolutely. And I've probably mentioned to you before too, like in my own reading it certainly made a difference for me. And I know even other people that I've spoken to who, I've passed it on to and told like, hey, you need to read this, have also had that same feedback. So it's certainly achieving that. I can attest to that.
I love you, Tiara. Thank you. I love you so much.
You're the sweetest. And Patricia and Gabrielle, I'm curious on your thoughts on this as well, and just again how Indo-Caribbean women have reinvented themselves in these recent times. Because one thing I love is that we do have different generations here, so I think everyone can kind of maybe have an insight on that.
Can I start by saying that Crystal, I didn't know whether to clap or cry because I thought it was a very moving piece. And it is part of the undocumented history that we don't have. So I think it's a very valuable story to tell. We know of so many migrants who've gone and quote unquote made it or whatever. That what they go through to make it, if you like, that story isn't often told. I also, interestingly, wasn't living in Trinidad at the time, so I didn't experience Trinidad. For about 15 years, I'd lived out of Trinidad, so I didn't experience that period of Bhojpuri Shady and so on. So there's a lot of that story that was new to me as well. And I learn a lot through stories as opposed to, actually reading newspapers and so on. I actually retain more like that. So I was really, so in that sense, Tiara, I'm sure I've forgotten the question you asked. I wanted to comment more on Crystal's story, which I found very moving and actually appreciate. What was it you asked about again?
So yeah, no problem. The question was, can you speak to how Indo-Caribbean women have reinvented themselves and their roles?
I think I'll speak to that in a generic way. I think everyone reinvents themselves. I think it's not specific to Indo-Caribbean women. What you reinvent yourself from may be different. But I think it's in nature of generations to pass, to want to have the next generation have a better life, quote unquote. And it is in nature of people to reinvent themselves because things around change and you have to reinvent yourself. Otherwise, you won't survive. So Indo-Caribbean women are no different in that sense. I think what is happening with the Taliban now and Afghanistan is a case where if they are going to go according to their past behavior, you can get a retraction, a retrogression of how people can invent themselves and move ahead. But thankfully in the West so far, we have been freed of that. And I think that has been open to all Indian women.
Thank you. And Gabrielle, how about you? What are your thoughts on this?
I very much agree with what Patricia said. I think, especially when we think about our shared history, I think immigration has led to the reinvention of from the Indian woman to the Indo-Caribbean woman to, for me, the Indo-Caribbean American woman. And I think it's given us new opportunities with each of those moves and also as time has gone on, right? So I feel like for me and my generation, I think it's just, for example, my mom was a working mom and she was able to take care of the house and also work for her own because she wanted to and do something that she cared about and was passionate about. I think for me, being a writer and to have that celebrated in my family and for that to be an acceptable path, not having to adhere to those traditional careers that were seen as valuable back then, but to see the value in creativity and the more creative careers and just living. I think Crystal had spoken about this, about, the sacrifices that, the generations before her mother and her grandmother have made to let her live her life, to just be. I think that's what it means to be an Indo-Caribbean woman today for the women that I know. Of course, that's not for everybody, but I think that's the freedom that I feel, that I can just be and I can make the choices that I want to make, whether it's wearing a hijab or, writing and having that be my career. So I think that's how we reinvent ourselves, and now we're just ourselves and in all the ways that means. So I love that we have the freedom to be ourselves in that way, whatever that means for who you are as a person. It doesn't have, being Indo-Caribbean is now different for every woman.
Absolutely. I love that. I absolutely love all the points that you guys have raised alongside that one. And just as we get into our last reading, Patricia, I'd like to invite you to read from Midata Midata.
Great. Thank you again. I have to say that this book, this is a a short story, but it is based on a pulling together of many experiences that I've had with helpers in Jamaica. It is not about an Indian woman, it's about a Black woman. And it is in this book, Travels with Her Husband. My husband is a British painter, Rex Dixon. A lot of the book, because I've been a scholar and I've traveled, widely throughout the world, he generally traveled with me, and he illustrates with drawings throughout. So it is very much of an illustrated text as well, and he has bits in it. And many of them are light because they pick up on the humor of our travels as well. So it's actually a good travel book. It's not a book that is, serious at all in that sense, but very serious in the sense it is almost an autobiography written as a travelogue and about a relationship. But this one is based on, it is set in Jamaica, and it's based on stories I've pulled together of helpers that I've synthesized into one. It's called Midata Midata. And I don't have the Jamaican accent on pat, even though I lived there for 9 years, but forgive me. When standing quiet in the front porch as Jessica coming from work, blood red hibiscus petals and butchered purple bougainvillea making a rough pattern on the tile floor. Gwen had the kitchen knife in she hand. The sharp one she just used to cut up goat meat and clean the red snapper that Jessica buy from Papi. What happened here, Gwen? Someone come in and try to attack you? Jessica standing there in shock, looking around her shredded house, curtains hanging like loose bandages, lime green pools of squeezy splashed about on the cedar floor, a trail of broken glass from room to room. Gwen like she not even there, eyes dull like burnt out coals, her mouth like a Salvador Dali clock rim. She had come to the house as a helper 2 years ago. Jessica used to leave notes for Gwen to do the chores and realized one evening when she found half the meal unprepared and a spidery scroll, Miss Jess, the bean and bad, that Gwen could barely read or write. But Gwen was honest and kind and hardworking, a woman of 42 who looked like 59. Jessica liked how Gwen would make her cocoa tea with fresh mint from the garden. She massaged Jessica's head with olive oil for 1 hour one morning, and the headache she had just gone away. Gwen liked working for people who appreciate her, not the kind that shovel work on she back like she's still some slave in a cane field. She preferred people from away who had manners and brought up. Jessica was from foreign. Miss Jess treated her real good. For 2 years now, Monday to Friday, Gwen crossed a bumpy track from a galvanized hut to the nearest bus stop on Irishtown Hill. Then she take the maxi taxi down to Halfway Tree, standing room only this hour of the morning. The pusher shouting, smile up yourself, as he shove another body into the back. Then she take a next overcrowded smile up yourself bus up to Harrington Crescent. The bus didn't even stop in front of Jessica's house. She had to get out at Ligoni and then walk 5 minutes in the morning sun before she gets to the front door. She raised 3 children this way, working in people's house since she turned 13. The children and father never last. The first 2 stay around long enough to see them picnic born. 2 boys, Jojo and Tobias. She glad to see the back of number 1. He used to abuse her. The second child father had religion, but that never stopped him from leaving. She managed to get the 2 sons away from trouble early by sending them to live with a relation in the Bronx that she never visits herself. She ain't hear from them lately, but as far as she know they live in, and she feels she do her duty by them. Babylon bullets now get time to gun them down in Tivoli Garden. The last child before she tied she belly was Bobsy Boy. He stayed longer than the rest. The last child father before she tied she belly was Bobsy Boy. He stayed longer than the rest. Maybe that is why Mavis come out so good. She make Mavis go to school and stay far away from boys. She daughter Mavis Petersfield, primary school pupil teacher now, boarding by respectable Mrs. Kent in Newtown, wearing white blouse and bright blue pleated skirt and black close-up shoes every day. Not like Gwen, who still wearing washout gansy and slippers. Gwen talking to herself proudly sometimes as she scrubbed another pot to cook the rice and peas for Jessica and Cyrus' dinner. Mavis Peterfield, Mavis schoolmistress in Campion College. Mavis, a daughter, would keep her company in old age. Mavis visit her every other Sunday and with cake and sometimes chicken and chips from KFC. Gwen had managed to get Mavis away from the Don in the village when she turned young lady, after he cut up Mavis' hand with a penknife because she wouldn't go with him. Gwen had sent Mavis to live uptown so her daughter could be safe. The two policemen come early that morning. Gwen still asleep, dreaming of reading the Bible one day when Mavis would find time to teach her. She didn't cry when they showed her Mavis' blouse and skirt and asked if she could recognize it. She'd take it from them quiet. Like somebody crack a bottle of red label wine all over the child's clothes, she say as if she talking to herself. When looking over the clothes, like Mavis inside it, the white blouse dirty red and the blue skirt turned mauve in some place. Mavis' uniform need washing, she mumbled quietly. She tell them they must leave it with her. She pushed the bedclothes into her bag she take to work and roused herself up after the policemen gone. She had to finish the scrubbing she left yesterday. She took the 2 bus as usual and find her way to the house in Harrendale Crescent. She walked into the kitchen. Then she picked up a knife and she went to work on Miss Jessica's house. Thank you.
That was absolutely an amazing piece and such an emotional one as well. And it's such an honor to listen to you read it as well. From this one, I thought so much about the weight that I think not again Indo-Caribbean women, but Caribbean women as a whole have carried. And just as, even your character in the story, she just had this devastating news and still found herself going to work. And I think women have often carried this weight where they don't always get to process emotion. You still have to, there's still a home to maintain. There's still work to be done and people to be catered to, except for sometimes, ourselves. And my question to you, Patricia, I'm curious is how have you seen this in your own life and how has it translated into the women in your writing?
Well, Gwen's story is about a woman who had a mental breakdown. And it actually happened, by the way. It happened in my house, so I understand. And it was because of the whatever, her mental pressures. I think one of the things about Caribbean women is the mythology. The mythology that we are Black Caribbean women in particular. But I think, Indian women carry much of that as well, that we are always strong and independent, that we can, carry a lot of burdens, and that we don't need to have that care and protection, the nuances of gender relationships that all women want, that kind of the chivalry, the respect, the kindnesses, because love is not something that is about saying, I love you. Love is about, and respect is about showing that on an everyday basis. And, I think Caribbean are probably strained, but I think part of the problem of being a Caribbean woman is not having that balance and not seeing that balance is weighed up, if you like. So the idea of say, Crystal's story about the, infidelities. Infidelities happen all over the world, but Caribbean women grew up with the notion that you're supposed to take on, to live with infidelity. And only women who are strong left that and went out on their own. And, as the generations move, women are more and more putting their feet down and saying, no, I'm not going to take this. And I want a relationship that's based on a certain amount of fidelity. If they themselves choose to, of course, because, it works both ways. So what can I say about Caribbean women? I think I've looked at women in other societies I've lived in, And again, I have to say, there are a lot of similarities. There's a universality about what women go through, which is why we have a feminist movement that is so global. But that Caribbean women have had to take on a certain struggle that was about finding voice, creating that visibility, defining their space and defining themselves as workers, as well as, their femininity, if you like, or their choice of their sexuality. Let me leave that let me see if others have to weigh in as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Gabrielle and Crystal, you're welcome to jump in on this one too.
I don't think I can add anything else to what Patricia just so eloquently described. I honestly can't add anything or a different perspective. Or I agree with a lot of what you said, and you said it so well.
I agree. I think it was well said and well answered, and so I'm not going to spoil it by saying anything else.
Maybe you could talk about what young Caribbean womanhood, because I think there are generational differences. I think you have different struggles now. An older generation fought for one thing, and there are different generations.
Yeah. Tiara, the question was about, I'm just confirming the question again.
Yeah, about just the weight that we've seen Caribbean women as a whole carry, and how we may have seen this in our in our own personal lives, and the way it maybe has translated into your writing as well.
I think that
oh, sorry.
I think that it has. I don't think it's really translated into my writing, but I'll get to that part last. I think again, it's a generational thing. I think I didn't recognize this when I was younger, but I had never really seen my grandmother cry. I think I still haven't, but I have seen my grandfather, weep at a funeral for a sibling of his, but I still have yet to see my grandmother cry. And I think that comes from exactly what Patricia was talking about always having to be strong and always having to carry on and not showing weakness, not having the opportunity or the luxury of doing that. And I think when I said I in my generation, because of the sacrifices that I feel like my grandmother has made and my mother has made, and just the opportunities that I have and the way that I've lived my life, I think that it's a very big difference. I think that, I've prioritized my mental health and knowing that it's okay to go to therapy and to talk about things, and that doesn't have to be something wrong with you to make space, talk about what's going on in your life, and to have an unbiased third party who can ask you questions. I find therapy to be a lot like writing. When Patricia was saying she writes to understand, I've also said that I write to understand the world around me, but also the world within. And I feel like therapy, much like that, I've found to be exactly the same, where you start to verbalize things. They're not all just jumbled up in your head. And then also the benefit of having somebody else ask you questions. So I think for me, what I've seen, not just for me, but for others my age as well, my peers who are also Indo-Caribbean women, is, I have a lot of friends who are in therapy, and there's nothing. Sorry, I was hearing an echo. That we're making that space. And I think that's one of the things is really mental health, because I really identified with what Patricia was saying. And I think it's continually gotten better. I think for my grandmother, she doesn't feel like she, even now where we tell her you have the room to speak about these things, it's very hard to break out of that, because she's lived her life so long having to believe that being strong is not speaking about it, or that she doesn't deserve to have the room to speak about it. And then I think that the walls have broken down a little bit, in my mother's generation. And with me, I think I'm breaking it down a little bit more. And hopefully that will continue with future generations. So I think that mental health aspect and is definitely something that I've seen change. And then also just not feeling like, I think the other big thing is not really caring what people think. I think that is something that we have learned culturally, I think it's all the way back from when they came from India. We have brought that down to Guyana with us, or the Caribbean with us, and because it's a cultural ideology that we must, we have to care about the community, and we have to care about family and the family unit, and not just about ourselves. And it's about what's best for the family or best for the community, and not just what's best for ourselves. So I think, again, for me and my peers, it's really about not what will people not what will people think if I wear the hijab, but how I feel if I don't, if I let other people dictate what I do. So I think it's breaking down a lot of those different boundaries.
Go ahead. I think what you said is really important, Gabrielle. A lot of what you said is so important, and it resonates so much with me, because so if I'm to take it down just to the everyday personal level and my interactions with my children, I have 3 little kids, and just teaching them differently, responding to them differently than what was taught, which is actually so much harder than you realize once you're in the middle of it. Because what I'm taught is, oh, don't cry, you need to face the world strong. These are words that parents tell their children. These are words that my parents told me. Don't cry. What are you crying for? Right? Do you want me to give you something to cry about? There are all these. So I choose to approach parenting differently, because then growing up, I'm afraid to share what I really feel inside. I'm afraid to share my thoughts. I'm afraid to speak up and speak out. And so I had a lot of growing to do. And what I do when my children cry is say, well, if you feel that way, feel it out. Cry if you need to, right? I have 2 girls and a boy. Now we're talking about gender differences, right? And boys are really expected not to cry and not show emotions. And that's a lot of pressure on boys. And so I say, if you need to cry, then cry. I always quote Eminem, and people are always surprised, because Eminem in Mockingbird, when he's talking to his daughter, he says, feel what you feel inside. And that's true. Feel what you feel inside, show it on the outside, and don't squelch that, because there's so much more growing and learning that we have to do in the world. And hiding inside of ourselves and learning these things from our parents, that really hinders us along the way.
Thank you, all of you guys. I think so many great points were made all across the board here. And, Gabrielle, I really resonated with a lot of what you said, especially that concept of not caring what people are going to think. And I think you and I are probably roughly the same age as well. So I do think that is, a big thing that's come into our generation as well. So thank you. And thank you, all 3 of you, for the points that you've made. So to tie into this absolutely fantastic discussion, I'm going to end off with one last question. I know these have been packed, and I applaud all of you guys for your answers and, for the thought and care. So tying back into this concept again of, being called Beti, and, these new contemporary expressions, these new traits that we're all creating and redefining, and, however we want to, name it for ourselves. How do each of you choose to define yourself as an Indo-Caribbean woman in 2021? What does that look like, or what does that sound like for each of you?
I'm going to go first, because my answer is a mess, because I am a mess. Okay. I don't define myself. I found it very, very difficult. Overall, it's just very difficult to define yourself, but then we're living in the middle of a pandemic, and different people are worried about different things. I don't have an answer to that question, and I wish I did. Or maybe I'm just learning and feeling my way through something right now, but it is really hard to define yourself in the world that we live in right now. That's all I have to say. I'm so sorry.
That is absolutely okay. I think, like I said, even with this question, it's, what it might sound like or look like to each of you, because I think, everyone's always in a different place. And I think I love the fact that the one thing everyone's kind of brought up is just that learning and that process that clearly continues, throughout the years. And I think it's totally okay if we don't all necessarily have solid answers, but it's certainly interesting to see where I think our different people in our community have thoughts on this for sure.
Gabrielle, do you want to go first?
Sure. I agree. It's hard to define one label. Like when I think about myself, I think there's this side of me that connects with my Indian roots, with being Caribbean, with being a writer, with being Muslim, with being American. So it's hard to really define who you are or just define one part of yourself. But I think if we're talking about being an Indo-Caribbean American woman for me in 2021, I think I just feel incredibly grateful. I think to know the sacrifices, like how insane were people in the best way to travel across the world and the things that they went through, their family members. And I'm learning more about this the more that I'm doing reading about indentureship and that trip over, which was not really a trip. It was like a 3.5-month journey of pregnant women giving birth on board and what that was like, or just the conditions of doing that. I feel like I can never measure up to these women who have gone through incredible difficulty in their lives, but incredibly proud to be the product of that, and to have all these opportunities. And so I think for me, what it means is recognizing that and honoring that by being me, by, taking every opportunity I have, speaking up for myself, making the decisions that I want to make, because I know that a lot of women before us did not have that opportunity. So I think being Indo-Caribbean for me today just means to recognize where I've come from, and be extremely grateful that I've ended up here in New York, in America. Like, especially being Muslim, I feel like especially grateful to be in New York, because I do feel like it's the most diverse place in the United States. And I have never, there have been moments, because I do live in Long Island, where I do feel out of place, but in the city, I don't necessarily feel out of place ever.
For the record, Jersey City in New Jersey is the most diverse city in the US.
Okay.
I just have that.
No, I haven't been to Jersey City, but from all the other places in the world that I've been, that's how I feel most at home here in New York. And like I fit here, but yeah, so just incredibly grateful, and it just means taking all the opportunities I have and not letting them fall by the wayside or being complacent, but always striving for better and making the next generation, however 10, 15 years from now, have even more opportunity, like just carrying on the legacy, I think.
It's interesting that you all talk about the diversity, because Trinidad and Guyana and Suriname used to, at one point in time, we represented early experiments in that kind of precocious settling of peoples, but the cities now are far more diverse and complex and multiple races. So that experience is really important for that shaping of race. But I think what I've come to, and this is a product of age as well, I've, over the last maybe, I don't know how many decades, I've finally come to accept myself, my nose, which I hated for many years, and to accept a certain Indianness about me, and to not rail against it. This is what I am. This is whoever gifted me that, that's what I am. I also have come to accept my aesthetic, which is a very kind of rococo one, a bit of this, a bit of that, that kind of the intricacy of an Indian filigree mixed with an aesthetic that is, very European or whatever, and very rococo and very, very much that blend. And I think accepting oneself is also having an aesthetic that you around you that you feel comfortable with. But personally, I feel that I a repository of a past culture onto which I've grafted many other cultures that are indivisible from my Indianness now. And I celebrate that very much. I would not be what I am without living in Trinidad and experiencing and growing up with African culture so close, and traveling and learning and understanding European culture. I lived in the Netherlands, I lived in the UK, US, and so on. Jamaica, which I loved. There's so much of that multiplicity. But one of the things I do feel as an Indian woman now is and maybe this has been part of why I write and continue to do this, is I have wanted to be a role model for Indo-Caribbean women, wherever they are, because I think a lot of the stories I tell and the way I speak about things actually free people from the burdens that we carry. And I do not think those burdens are necessary. I think some are very necessary. We live and we die, we get old age. Those are burdens. Those are real illnesses, are real burdens. But the burden of one's skin and the burden of one's ethnicity and so on are things that a new generation has to find a way to free the world of. And I think Indo-Caribbean women are centered because they have the home and that same space that Gabrielle talks about, that cultural space. It still actually is very centering while at the same time giving you that freedom. And maybe that is something that we need to share. This is one of the things that maybe we've said. Another colleague of mine, Gabrielle Hussein, is written on Indo-Caribbean feminism on Lisa Uta, about what constitutes Indo-Caribbean feminism. What is it we have to see? And maybe I'm part of that voice. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Can I just get like a huge round of applause for all three of you? Just because I think everyone has just finished off with the best, just the best, couldn't put it better, just everything. That was amazing. All three of you.
Pocket. I think I could have put it better, but I just really can't.
Thank you so much, Patricia, Gabrielle, Crystal. It's been such an honor and such a wonderful time getting to chat with all three of you guys tonight, and just getting to hear you read your work out loud. You've all been such a pleasure, and I'm sure our audience has enjoyed it. I absolutely just love everything about the conversation we've had tonight. And I want to just, again, extend a huge thank you to you, all three of you, for sharing your work, for continuing to do the work that you do, and for being here tonight and speaking with me.
Tiara, you were amazing. It takes a lot to make a Zoom room feel warm and inviting and comfortable. And you did that as a moderator. So thank you also. I'm very glad to share this space with Gabrielle, Patricia, Tiara, and all because of BC. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the letters now. Thank you for,
BCLF.
What is it? Is it BCLF? Thank you guys always. I always love working with you.
Thank you for having me on this BCLF. And this is it's such a pleasure to meet three lovely young women who I will look out for, read their work, look forward to connecting with again. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you so much, Tiara, for your insightful questions. I think that your questions have made for a really important and insightful and warm and just amazing conversation that we've had today. And incredibly honored to share this space with Patricia and with Crystal and with you, Tiara, as well. And thank you to BCLF for the opportunity to be here and to share my work and to share Untold. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.